Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Indica Books open house with Otis. We took a break of about 5 or 6 weeks to give everyone time to recharge and to make progress on their writing tasks, activities, and projects. And today, this Sunday, we are back. Now, for those of you who are joining in or viewing this video for the first time, this is how it works. Indica Books arranges a weekly open house with Otis, and it's open to anyone and everyone. And the way it works is that you send in a short 800-word writing piece that you would like feedback on. You send it as a PDF document. Otis views it. He puts in some of his comments and marks it up and sends it back to you. And then when we meet on a Sunday, like we are meeting now, all of us go through that piece. Otis will walk us through his thoughts, his feedback, and you and anyone else for that matter is more than free and actually encouraged to ask questions and essentially to see what went well, what didn't work too well in that writing piece. You can ask him questions about some of the technical aspects of writing and some of the things that Otis keeps on telling us about, like point of view and show don't tell and all of the wonderful things about writing. So with that, I will turn this over to you, Otis. I believe we have 3 pieces to go over today.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Sorry, I have a little technical difficulty. One of my screens went on the fritz over the summer, so I don't have its handy dandy camera and the ability to share my screen. So I'm on my iPad today. So forgive me for that. Now I know that I really have to get up to speed and get another camera. So that will all happen by next week. And hopefully I'll get some more pieces too. I thank you for sending pieces this week. I had 3 of them, a short piece from Abhinav, from his daughter, a review, and this review. Sunil, are you able to join on video? Hey, how are you?
Sunil, you're muted. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. I'm visible and audible, right?
Yeah, you're visible and audible. Thank you. We're throwing a lot at you right away. I mean, I just sent you back your piece, and you're throwing it up there, and you haven't even looked at it, and all these things. So we don't have to worry necessarily about looking at it. We don't have to see my marks.
I'm on my iPad too, so I just read it. I just read your, as in remarks on the.
Yeah, right. So don't worry about throwing the piece up precisely. We'll be able to live without that for now. Maybe you could. I love this. I think that's Sanskrit at the top of the piece. I love seeing the Sanskrit written.
Yeah.
Is that what that is?
Yeah. It's a quote from the Bhagavad Gita, which is a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna in the Mahabharata.
Oh, okay. I was just, just this last week, I was looking at a book about how to learn how to read Sanskrit. It looked a little bit formidable, but I'm guessing that you can read it.
Yeah, I can. It was actually written in many scripts. So in present day India, this script is used for 3 languages, as in Sanskrit, Hindi, and Marathi. That's the Devanagari script.
Oh, okay. And those other 2 are modern languages that are in use.
Yeah, those are modern languages, but Sanskrit, as you know, is a very ancient language. So in the south, it was written in a different script. In Tibet, it was written in a different script. In Kashmir, it was written in a different script. So it has a long history of evolution, kind of like Old English was written in a Latin script, but slightly different from what it is now. So it's not comparable, but yeah, I guess I could get my point across.
Right. Yeah, I think of Sanskrit being like Hebrew. I mean, Hebrew is an ancient language,
Yes,
that's been in existence for such a long period of time. It's maybe better than English. English is a relatively recent language. I mean, the Roman alphabet, right, is a recent in comparison to Sanskrit. Can you tell us a little bit about the book that you're reviewing? Then I'll have you read the first couple paragraphs.
Yeah, the book has been written by Dr. Deepthi Navaratna. She's from the Indian Institute of Science, the National Institute of Advanced Studies here. It's actually a scientific institute, but she has, am I audible, right? I'm audible, yeah.
Yeah.
She's written a biography on the last Maharaja of Mysore, who was Jaya Chamarajendra Wadiyar. And when India became independent, there were approximately 580 to 584 princely states here. So Mysore was relatively a big princely state, as in the British had created a hierarchy. So the gentleman about whom she has written a biography was an intellectual with diverse interests, as in he was equally interested in Western classical music. He sponsored musician Baylor or something for his last symphonies, and also arranged as in their recording and as a live performance at the Royal Albert Hall in London. And he was equally interested in, say, Sanskrit prosody and meters. It is actually an essential part of the Sanskrit language. So he composed poems also in that language, and he was very talented in Western classical music as well. Apart from taking care of his kingdom, which was also a job, and as in the birth pangs of independence in India, at that time, the Indian government was incorporating all of these states into the Indian Union. And as a result, their powers were not as great as before, and they had to make do with as a lesser amount of money. Kind of like the British monarchy now exists on as in taxpayers' expense, and they have opened up Buckingham, Windsor, all of that to make money. Not comparable, because this is 1947 India, but my point is they had, when you are solely the monarch of a kingdom, you have all of these resources at your disposal, as in you have a greater amount of money vis-a-vis a democratic government coming in. Okay. And I guess, okay. Yeah.
Okay, so great. It sounds very interesting. Maybe do you want to read? Let's have you read the first. You can include the quote from the Bhagavad Gita, and then maybe just those first 3 paragraphs. ending
Okay.
with the equanimity. Ending with equanimity would be great.
Okay. Nahi jnanena sadrisham pavitram iham vidyate tat swayam yoga samsiddhah kalena atmani vindati. 438 Bhagavad Gita. The English translation is, there certainly is no purifier in the world like knowledge, who is himself slash herself perfected in yoga divinity, finds it in due course of time. The Upanishads and Indian philosophy often refer to the lower apara vidya, the finite world of the senses, and the higher para vidya, in brackets transcendental, as bifurcations of the knowledge spectrum. In the Maverick Maharaja, that's the name of the book, Dr. Deepthi Navaratna has brought forth the life of a polymath Maharaja who traversed this divide with aplomb. Herself a multifaceted personality who traverses the spheres of music, science, and literature with ease, she writes with a rare empathy that allows the personality of Jayachama Rajendra Vadeyar to come alive in our imagination with all the pathos and tumultuous experiences that constitute his life story. Ideal kings such as Janaka also form part of a Puranic lore, as well as the Western construct of Plato's philosopher king, in quotes. However, the mundane and the trivial constitute a large part of our lived experience. Accounts of the Maharajas of India are largely characterized by debauchery or extreme valor, both notable for their extremes. However, the Mysore Maharaja veers more towards the Gita ideal of Sthit Prajna, equanimity.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so we can't look at it, but I read through and I will say maybe the rest of the group here can get a sense of Sunil's ability to draw in a lot of sources. Sunil, I will say that you remind me of me a little bit in this, because I will draw upon many sources, and I love a swirl of ideas. I mean, I guess it's kind of describes my process in writing is to gather a lot of ideas, mix them around, and become the catalyst from which something might occur, and I see that a little bit in your writing style too. I wrote at the end that this review is this was a wild review which I failed to keep up with. I don't feel like I've come away with a clear idea about what this book is about. Still, I enjoyed the ride. That's what I wrote. Because I definitely enjoyed having all these ideas thrown at me, and there were numbers of times when I thought, "Ooh, I need to take a note and look up what that is." But we might also, so as a principle, we might see that we probably don't want that. We don't want our reader to be confronted with ideas that they don't understand and then leave our work and go to some other work to find out what it is. Like, this is,
okay.
I'm being sort of funny about it, but it's like, we're writers and we have our processes. Okay, I will say my process, I would not wish it on anyone, but however, Sunil, you have it a little bit. This process of gathering in all that we know and swirling it up into a big stew, it's exciting for me, and it's probably exciting for you, but it's difficult for the reader because the reader doesn't have access to all these ideas. It's funny that Abhinav said, I've been working on my novel, and he said I should throw up 800 words and to the group. And I thought, oh no, because then the veil will be removed and you will see very clearly, if I look at anything that I've written, it definitely has this kind of flavor of drawing upon many, many things. I think it's a great process. It's particularly a great process for getting to, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but to new ideas. I think it's a kind of synthesis that brings us someplace potentially new. And I think that that's something that we as writers really want to get to. That said, I'm setting you up a little bit here. That said, what the job of a review is to present a book to readers to see if they want to buy it or not. I will admit that I have written reviews that were more about my ideas than the book. So, I think we do it sometimes. But I think out of the things that you've drawn together here, and this is what I find in my own work, is that I really have to, it's not exactly condense it, because condensing it doesn't make it better, but to find out what it is after I've pulled all these things together, what is it that I really want to say? And when we write something, this is a funny thing, when we write something, whether it's a novel or a story or a review, we kind of say one thing. It has to be really unified. So, I love the ideas that you're exploring here, but I do feel like I haven't really gotten a sense of this book. You obviously, you throw a huge curveball at us right from the get-go with, this idea of knowledge, the bifurcation of knowledge, then, the bifurcation of the knowledge spectrum. I will say that I think a lot about this stuff, so I kind of followed you, but a lot of people are not thinking about the bifurcation of knowledge systems through sensory and transcendentalism. I think I'm being honest. Maybe
actually, sorry to interrupt. I probably came up with this reading the biography of this Maharaja, who was kind of like this. He was interested in music and as in abstruse Indian philosophy as well as Western philosophy. So probably that was the catalyst for writing such a review. Like if I had read the biography of Jim Morrison as a teenager, so it was like Jim Morrison is the other end of the spectrum, but he also explored as in his, I actually liked his melodies. So, and he had this quote, there are things known and there are things unknown. And in between there are the doors, which I think he took from Aldous Huxley. So if my point being that if you say read Jim Morrison, then your brain may come up with as in musical. So this Maharaja was like interested in Western classical music, South Indian classical music, Western philosophy and Indian philosophy. So probably that is why I came up with that kind of a review. That's my own
I think it's you are definitely involved with the book. I can feel that, and you might see some, you might have a sympathetic resonance with this Maharaja yourself a little bit. I'm going to guess that you're something of a polymath and music and art and thinking about these, these kinds of the knowledge systems and the states of consciousness. These are of interest to you. I think the hard fact of it is you have to ground the reader, first, so there's going to be a while where you have to tell us about the book. Like I don't even know. So I don't know who, so even if you look at the first paragraph, the Maverick Maharaja, so I don't know what that is. Maybe I'm particular because I'm a Yankee and all, but we want to, whether people know who that person is or not, you want to ground all of your readership in like, what are we talking about? Abhinav has seen it many times. and a lot of people have in this class, I'll say, establish the setting / point of view. So establish the settings / point of view is a little bit wider than basically saying, he walked into the circus tent. Okay, yes, that does establish the point of view and the setting, but it actually means locating the reader in the writer's consciousness. You want to set your reader in the beginning someplace solid, so they understand what you're doing. So you want to talk about things like, this is a book, it's nonfiction, it sounds like. See, I didn't even know if it was nonfiction. The Maverick Maharaja could have been a fiction work as far as I know. I don't know that it has a historical, that I thought maybe it's historical fiction. That's actually what I thought at first. I really didn't know. So you want to establish that it's history. You also want to say, a review is talking about a book, which is a tactile thing. You want to set it in a context of other work, because that's what a book is, kind of part of a conversation that already exists. So we want to look at books, not fiction, sometimes not, but history certainly. In the context of books about Indian history and about this period, and maybe even about this particular Maharaja, what does this book add? That's the question. Why read this book as opposed to other books? You'll see that what I'm saying is like incredibly mundane, in comparison to what you're writing about, right? And I'm with you. I'm excited about these ideas. It's very hard to write about music. I love these ideas about music. I love the philosophy. I love all those things. But we have to do this mundane work when we're writing a review of grounding the reader in some kind of reality that they can understand. And it's very much feet on the ground. It's not levitating above the ground. It's just feet walking right on the ground. This is a book. These are the other books. This is what it adds. I like your conversation about this author. It kind of drops in out of nowhere. I don't see, even when the Maverick Maharaja, I don't know. I know almost nothing. I don't know if that might be a woman, right? So when it's herself a multifaceted personality, I don't even know who we're talking about anymore. So, but I mean, those are probably my issues more than yours. But just ground it. And then if the objective is to write a review of the book, then you want to ground it in this way. If you want to make it a paper which is kind of a response to reading the book, then make it that. So it's like, I think what you did a little bit is you sort of went between those two. You sort of were like, I'm going to write a review, but I really am writing a response of my response to the book. And you went into the middle, and I will say either go one side or go the other side. Right? Okay. But in any case, do ground us in the book itself, and its historical context and its context as a book, a history book. But the book sounds fascinating. The other thing is, you sort of mentioned that the author, maybe, how do you say that? Hagiography? How do you say that word?
It's from as in Western hagiography is actually as in theological figure, largely drawn from, say, the Catholic Church. Say if I'm writing a biography of a Jesuit saint, say Francis Xavier or something, I'll as in the reviewers, they're very fond of that saint, so they'll not even point out a single flaw in that.
Right. No, I know what it means. but it's one of those words I've never said out loud, so I don't know how to say it. I have a number of words.
I guess you being American would pronounce it authentically, probably.
I don't know. I've never heard anyone say it, and I've never said it. I've only read it. Yeah. So I mean, that might be something in a review. That might be something to explore. If there are two sides. If this figure was maybe more controversial, and maybe this author is purposely painting them in this sort of. I think it sort of means like to sanctify or make them saintly.
Because I couldn't find, as in nothing very critical of the Maharaja. Like I have read other biographies, and they, to balance the whole equation out, they do include, as in certain critical sections. Obviously, politicians have multiple biographies written on them. Even Meghan Markle, if I take an example, she has this PR guy who writes a positive biography, and there's this Englishman who has come out with Revenge or something, which is totally negative outlook of her life. So,
right.
Some reviewers, to balance it out, even though they are fond of the subject, include something slightly critical or negative, as in exploring certain flaws in that particular personality. So I couldn't find anything critical as such. So that was a con in my opinion, as in my thinking.
Yeah, usually in form, what we like to do as writers is we like to have an opinion, and then we like to put up a straw man argument and then knock it down in order to prove that we're even more right than ever. So that's usually the style for writers. We always have our bias, of course, but as you're saying, like there's nothing that balances it out at all. Right. Yeah, that seems worthy of a comment. But yeah, I think I feel interested in the book, and I definitely felt your excitement, your intellectual excitement about reading it. But I would like it to be, somewhat more grounded, so that the reader can make these decisions. I've said this before to the group as a whole, but like basically we want to look at the reader as they really want something, and so we want to let them know whatever our piece is. We want to kind of let them know what it is about right away, and if they don't want to read that, then they go somewhere else, right? So we want to basically take them down the line and really contextualize what we're writing, so that they can make a decision. In this case, probably in a review, a decision about whether they're going to buy the book or not. And so that's usually in a review, that's going to be our purpose. But there is a place when you get to a certain level of writing reviews where you also think of your review as your work, and you have a certain style, and you might be headed in that direction, but you do have to cover the nuts and bolts stuff too. Well, thank you, Sunil. Thanks for submitting this. And the next piece you submit, please submit on a PDF and to send to me. In an email, it can get a little bit. I have to do technological things that are
makes sense.
That are a little difficult.
Yeah. No problem. I didn't know.
Okay.
Sorry about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sunil. And then Abhinav, I think we have a piece by your daughter and a short piece by you. You want to talk about your piece a little bit?
Okay. Let me share my screen. I think I should be able to figure this out. Now the question is, what exactly do I want to share? I want to share the window, and I think this is one of, so I can never tell if it's, okay, so please tell me you can see my, the piece that I sent.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let me get this out of the way. Okay, so This is a short piece from the Mahabharata, and this particular episode occurs fairly early in the Mahabharata, where an account is being given of the origins of some of the principal characters in the Mahabharata, and uh, the overall setting of the story is that this person Janmajay is actually the king at the time, and he's hearing about and he's hearing from this person Vaishampayan. He's hearing about the events that took place in the Mahabharata literally generations before his time, and he wants to understand how come his ancestors had entered into such a bloody conflict, such a long drawn feud that had resulted in the deaths of so many. And this sage is sitting down along with others, and he's essentially telling this person, the king, how what had happened, why it had happened, and the histories of some of the principal characters. Yudhishthir was one of the five Pandavas, and so on. So this particular story briefly describes the origins of this person, Vidur. Uh, yeah.
Okay, Abhinav, let me ask. So what you're just telling me about, so you have someone who's basically telling a king. So you have a sage who's telling this story, and then we get the story, and is the story is of Mandavya, if I'm saying that right?
Correct. About this fellow Mandavya.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So I didn't understand that context for the story. I don't know if it's important or not, but for me, when I'm reading it, maybe I'm getting a few names that are explaining that to me, but I'm not able to place them. So I'm not getting a sense of that context. But I feel like I'm just dropped into the story, and I don't know if that context is important or not to your purpose.
Right. So again, I'm not sure how this will pan out, but yes, if this were a standalone piece, then it would make sense to put in a short paragraph at the beginning, setting out the context that I just described. I probably should have included that one paragraph when sending it to you. I think it would have.
Yeah. It's okay. Do you want to read? Maybe just. It's so short. I would almost love for you to read all of it. But anyway, maybe you could read from. Meanwhile, someone told the king that the person needs. Well, gosh, that's. Maybe you can set it up.
From here, you
the
mean?
bottom, the bottom of 2. Maybe from the paragraph it says, meanwhile, someone told the king that the person he had sentenced to death was a sage. Right. So
okay.
What we have, and maybe or you can set it up, but this idea that the sage is there and he's taken a vow of silence. Some robbers run into the hermitage and they ask him, where are the robbers? He doesn't say anything. They find the robbers and they say, you're an accomplice, and he doesn't say anything. They bring him in front of the king and they say, you're an accomplice with these robbers, you're sentenced to death. He doesn't say anything, right? So,
and this Mandavya then is sentenced to death, and that to a very gruesome form of capital punishment. He is impaled on a stake, and there he stays. He doesn't die, and then he wonders why. What possibly could I have done to deserve such a gruesome fate? I'm impaled and still alive. He calls someone's other sages to come to him in the form of vultures, and they said, we have no idea, but you must have done something to deserve this ghastly fate. So meanwhile, someone told the king that the person he had sentenced to death, Mandavya, was a sage. Aghast at what he had done, imposed a death sentence on a Brahmin, the king rushed to Mandavya, apologized, and had him brought down from the stake. The king himself set upon extracting the stake from Mandavya's body. To everyone's horror, the king was unable to extract the stake. He therefore did the next best thing. He cut it off at both ends, and so Mandavya walked around with the stake still inside him, and therefore he came to be known as Ani Mandavya from that day onwards. Eventually, Ani Mandavya died and went to heaven. He posed his question to Dharma, the god of death. What sin had he committed, especially one that warranted a punishment as gory as his? Dharma replied that Mandavya, as a child, had pierced an insect's tail with a blade of grass. For that act of cruelty, he had been subjected to that punishment. Was that fair? For a lapse as a child, the sentence was grossly disproportionate, Animandava maintained. The fuming sage cursed Dharma. The punishment, to be born as a man to a Shudra woman. Second, he decreed that an act performed by a child under the age of 14 years would not be a sin. Thus did Dharma take birth as Vidur. His father was Vyasa, a sage, but his mother was a maid to the Kuru queens Ambika and Balika. Despite being the most learned and the most qualified of the three brothers, Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidur, he lived his life serving them.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Abhinav. I really enjoyed this piece. I have a few questions about it. Maybe that issue of context is there a little bit. The first paragraph seems like it's looking for its way a little, and maybe it's a little bit redundant. I didn't make marks on it because I was still reading on.
This one?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems like it could be maybe a little bit tighter, or move in a single direction. It seems to, maybe it's a weird way to comment on it, but it seems to have sort of tendrils on it.
Okay, I mean, go ahead. I have a question that I want to ask, so I'll hold off a little bit.
Oh, yeah, why don't you go ahead and ask it now?
So here's my thing, right? The Mahabharata as a story is literally thousands of years old, firstly. Secondly, the story of the Mahabharata in various forms, retellings, adaptations, fictionalized settings and all has been retold, I'm not kidding, at least a few thousand times. So the challenge is that if I am telling a story, it's not going to be new to any Indian who reads it. They've probably read it, seen it, heard it, and so on n number of times. And how does one make it somewhat new, or if at least not new, at least how does one make it more interesting to the readers, so that, because at the end of the day, I mean, yes, there are only so many kinds of stories that exist, and every murder mystery, every thriller, every love story is at some level the same. And this is not to diminish the Mahabharata in any way, but the fact is that for the how do you bring the modern reader with their modern sensibilities into enjoying and immersing themselves into a story like the Mahabharata? So I think that is one fundamental question I have. And if I can't do it, then I'm just regurgitating that it's been said a lot better by a lot many people.
Right. Well, that's the central issue to my comment. I like this tale, I say, but maybe it could be a little clearer and with more detail. Where might you publish it? Is basically a question of that is kind of like that. I mean, it's like it seems like and it's written a little bit like a parable, what I'd be familiar with as a parable. And I imagine that as a story, I think it's written well. So, but is it written better than other people have written it, in those thousands of times that it's been written? What is it that's making this new is a question. So,
yes.
That is something for you to grapple with. So I'll give you some ideas, but if it's not doing anything new, then in a sense, in terms of publishing it, you have to think about, well, where's the venue? It could be like, you might have to create that venue yourself, like stories of the Mahabharata told by modern authors, right? And then even if you did that, right, then you would want to think about who are you as a modern author? Like, what is your style? And then how do you make it your style and not simply that style, that sort of ubiquitous parable style that you sort of have now? I like the parable style, and I even write sometimes in it, but you were thinking about what makes it new. right? I mean, this is what publishers are always doing. Ezra Pound said, make it new. He was a fascist sympathizer, so I always take Ezra Pound with a little grain of salt. But I think he's making a good point. When we look at something like Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, there's a story that even Shakespeare remade, right? He took all his stories from Italian drama and then he basically rewrote them with his own characters, with greater characterization, with his flair for language and all the things that he brings to it. After he wrote it with such excellence, then people just went ahead and took it, and they did it again. And even when people perform the play, right, they try and put their stamp on it, right? Everyone's trying to put their stamp on it. Leonardo DiCaprio was, they made that Romeo and Juliet where they cast it in the setting of Los Angeles. That was the little thing that made it new. So there are a lot of different ways to make it new, but you sort of have to figure out, how to do it. Yeah. And then even, so I think what happens is if you're going to represent it as a story from the Mahabharata, then you have to figure out really how you're doing that. So like stories from the Mahabharata as seen through modern authors. Like if you had an anthology like that, that could work. Or what you do is you simply take the story from the Mahabharata and you recast it with your own set of characters, right? So, I mean, I think it's arguable that the movie Bonnie and Clyde is basically Romeo and Juliet, right? So, but they're not saying it's Romeo and Juliet. They're, someone said Grendel is a good example. Yes, Grendel is a good example. Yes, Grendel is a very good example. What is that? That's, Ram, was that you? Remind me, that's the Hogarth and what are they? Oh, Beowulf. Right, so
it's on Beowulf. Yeah. It's on Beowulf.
Right, Beowulf was reconceived by John Gardner as Grendel. And then he, instead of telling the story from Hogarth, I think it's Hogarth's perspective, he told it from Grendel's perspective. And, that's a fascinating way to sort of recast the story to give it a different perspective. There are, in this particular story, so there are other ways too. Okay, let's say you were just doing this story. This story is told in this parable form. You could tell it in the much more modern form, and I can understand how it can be difficult. It's difficult when you take something that's ancient and even scriptural, and then you recast it for yourself. But you could write it with a more modern point of view, right? So like you could employ modern techniques to make this more interior rather than looking at it as something that's distant, which is that sort of older parable form. Instead, actually adopting the point of view of this person who's on the stake, right? That's a way to do it. So there are a number, I mean, you're asking yourself the right questions. And
yeah.
Actually, Abhinav, this is a very good story. You can extend it actually. See, I always saw the story as actually a sarcasm by Yama, that I punished you. Because the whole story you haven't told, right? But when he was actually put on that stake, right, and he was in a lot of pain, so the Ugrashrava forced his wife to take him to visit a prostitute. So this lady Dirghika Shilavati, she was carrying Ugrashrava on to visit that, the place where the prostitute lives. And in between, he sees Ani Mandave put on the stake, and they both actually have an argument with each other, where Ugrashava basically says, you finally came to your right, you have been rightly punished, and Ani Mandave then curses back and says that you will die before the sun rises. So Shilavati, because of her power, because she's daughter of Vishwakarma, stops the sun from coming. And Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, they all got involved, and Dattatreya, Durvasa, and so on are born. This is the whole story, right? And so when he goes to that, so Yama actually says, "Oh, because we are told the Ani Mandave and Ugrashava and everything, they have this rivalry and sort of an arrogance, and so I always thought of it as a Yam saying, oh, because you pierced like a fly, with a coconut husk, or put a with a blade of grass or something like that." So at that point, he again curses Yama. So this is basically showing that this arrogance has not gone yet. And I always thought of that as a story. The parable of the story is that his arrogance doesn't leave him.
Yeah, but tell me, which is it from a regional recension of the Mahabharata, or is it from a Puran?
I'll send you the details.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It's an extended one in Dakshinate, right? So the whole story comes out as basically a parable that your ego never leaves you, and that's why he got punished really for that little bit of peace remains inside. That Ani remains.
Fascinating.
I like that as the moral. Your ego never leaves you. That's great.
That's that thing which stays inside him. Yeah, right. That the stake which stays inside him, the ego. So that's the parable.
Fascinating.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah. So, really, take a look at it, Abhinav, and make some choices about what you want to do. You do have to change something. So, change the time, and Pranshu was, talking about these sort of, stopping the sun. So there's these mystical elements to the story. That's another way to make it new, is to remove the mystical elements and make it realism, right? To just figure out how to do that. Or, I personally like the idea of creating point of view. If you can, I think one of the great things that we've sort of discovered with writing is this ability to draw the reader into the point of view of someone else. So in a way, when we read this story, we read about the sage, but you could recast it so that we are him, right? So that we see and experience the world through his body, through his senses, etc. And I think I personally think that that's a very powerful way for readers to internalize experiences and stories.
Okay. Interesting. So you're very right, Otis. I mean, if I have to go ahead with this and make something of it, I think at a broader level, some decisions, some creative, artistic decisions will have to be taken. Whether it's point of view, whether it is realism, whether it is something else. So, yeah.
Right. You just have to make it your own. Which can be really.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, it can be hard to take that step and to own that, particularly with things that have so much history and tradition. But that's really what's at stake. Otherwise, rather than watching Leonardo DiCaprio play Romeo, we should just read the Shakespeare.
Exactly. That is, I think, at some level, that is the fundamental conflict that I have. The stories in themselves are hugely entertaining as well as informative and timeless, but that is also part of the challenge, right? They've been told and retold by better people in a better way. So, what can I bring new to the table?
But I think that you really have done a nice job with this piece. I think it's very clear. I feel like I really know the story afterwards and I understand it. I mean, yes, could I have a deeper emotional experience? Yeah, probably, in the modern standard. But I think it's really well written. And there is that, I say, where can you publish it? I mean, it's nearly, publishable material. I think anyone would read this with ease. It's a question then of how do you get the readership who wants to read this work? How do you gather them? How do you create a context in which these older stories that they already know appear new in a sense? And that's something like that anthology, the anthology of stories from the Mahabharata as reinterpreted by modern authors. An anthology such as that then becomes a venue for a piece like this one. Once that is established, though, you might want to say to yourself, well, is this all of the, the Abhinav, flavor that I want to give to this? Or do I want to do something a little bit more outrageous? Then you make those decisions,
Correct. Yes. In some ways, in many ways, every writer brings part of their own creative set of talents and skills and uniqueness to their writing, and that has to come across. I think if the piece has to be really the author's piece, and I think that's part of the challenge. I'm just regurgitating something that's been done and changing a few words here and there, or is it something that I'm bringing to the piece that reflects whatever it is I have to bring to the table?
Right, and it's you might think of it as like, what you're doing is a reimagining of it. But I also look at it like, I think we have a little bit of trouble conceptualizing this, but, I'll say in the olden days, people just spoke the stories, right? They spoke the stories. They thought they were always hearing the same story, but who knows, right, Abhinav? Who knows? There was no text to go back to find out whether every detail and every fact corresponded, or whether it changed for the region, or whether it changed a little bit for the audience, and everyone who told the story, obviously, whatever changes they made was representing that sense of individualism. That's T.S. Eliot's tradition and individual talent, right? So there's the tradition of storytelling. There is a form. There are stories. We're not inventing human experience, I'm pretty sure. We're writing about human experiences that have already existed and probably already been dealt with in some way, but we're adding it's not spin, because it's not conscious. We're adding our life and our soul as writers to the reimagining of these stories. So in that regard, I say the more you can let that out, the better. As we say, let your freak flag fly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Abhinav. I really enjoyed reading it. Nice, very nice, crisp sentences. Really a joy to read.
Thank you, Otis. Should I switch to the book review now?
Yes, please. This is your daughter's review, right?
Correct. So this is the younger one. She read this book, Verity by Colleen Hoover, a couple of months back, and I think she's read it like 2 times. And she, one of the things that she wants to do is write a review, write one review a month. I don't think she's been able to keep up with that pace because of her school and everything, but this is one review that she wanted to write. So I think she finished writing this like about a week back or so, and I thought this would be a good piece to send to you to get that feedback, because this is slightly different from the usual style of reviews that she employs. And I think part of that also is because she just loved the book.
Yeah. So Abhinav, I don't know if Annika is here, but this is such a great example in what we're talking about. Right, so like not to put the frame on you again, Abhinav, but like you're moving very carefully. Annika, she is not moving carefully at all. She's just going. She's jumping in. She's letting. So I think I probably mentioned this before. There was for a while, I was boxing, Queen's rule type boxing. And I had a coach, and he said, sometimes you just have to let your hands go. And that was a phrase that I really thought applied to writing. I mean, we write our sentences, we do our correct punctuation, we do this, that, and the other thing. But sometimes we just have to let our hands go. And that's a little bit, where you're developing with your piece. But Annika is already so able to let her hands go. When you have someone who's willing to let their hands go in this way, everyone else, I really truly suggest, please just get out of the way. I mean, if you find yourself in a boxing ring with a boxer who can let their hands go, just try and get out of the boxing ring. And this is a great fun piece. I love how much fun she has when she writes. It's totally apparent. She's clearly having fun when she reads. And in this review too, even though, I mean, I don't know if I'm going to pick up this book, but I know what she's talking about, right? I empathize and it resonates with me when you're reading a book that just captures you. And, I've read stories where I'm holding my breath. I've read stories, like she says in this review, where, this sense of depression, descends upon you because you're like, I'm not going to get another book as good as this one. Where am I going to find it? Yeah, I think that this is great. I mean, she'll want to just simply have, when you write a review, you probably should put up the publishing notes, somewhere in the beginning. So that should be part of the presentation.
Yeah. The author's name, the publisher, when it was published, how long it is, and so
yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah, put that up top so that we understand, so that we really get that context. There might be a place in this review to talk about the other works by this author, But
I think she does. She says that this author has been writing rom-coms or young adult or something like that. So she was a little tentative about. Here, reading the book, I was initially skeptical because Colleen Hoover is known for her proficiency in romance books, and I'm not the biggest fan of the genre. However, Verity gave me a high, unlike any other book I have read.
Yeah, I would probably try and get that, the author a little bit earlier so that we can, so that we understand this context, and then also understand sort of, I mean, that's a place where we're getting the writer, the reviewers sort of a perspective. And that's actually a good perspective. Like, I wasn't necessarily looking forward to it, but it captured me. I'd be sort of maybe interested in why this one did that. But we want the author and maybe some of her other works just in order to contextualize again, so we can understand where we're coming from. And I don't know. I mean, I don't feel strongly about it. I really enjoyed reading this. I think it's fun. It does take on a little bit of that. I was mentioning to Sunil, that the reviewer does develop, over time, a personality. First we probably should start just doing the work of the review, ... But then they develop a personality. This has obviously a lot of personality. The reviewer is really getting onto the page, and it becomes one of those things where, oh, I want to read this person's review. Reading these reviews is fun, and that's a really great place to be arriving. So, Abhinav, we'll just try and, duck and cover is what we'll do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Otis. Definitely, the reason that Annika is not here is because her midterms begin from tomorrow, and as you said, I am just looking for cover. I'm not going to go and poke the bears, as they say.
Yeah, right. Well, I don't think you don't have any worries when you have someone who can engage, like that with books. So that's a tremendous thing. How's everyone else? Nice to see some familiar faces out there, kind of, or see some familiar blank screens.
So, folks, I think you should send in your writing piece. We had a 5-week break. I'm sure there are things that you would have written, wanted to write, revised, edited, thought of. So, do send in those pieces. As I said, as always, this video will also be put up on YouTube in a couple of days, and I will share that link. And for most of you already know that, but there is a WhatsApp group that is strictly optional, but for anyone who wants to, have a discussion or just essentially, keep in touch with others from other participants of this group. So there's a WhatsApp group. I'm going to share a link to it in just a minute before we break. But do send in your pieces.
And I would like to say, I see you, Ashvani, Ram, Sri Charan. I expect some wild things from you. Pranshu, Jay, Madhavi, please. I know that all of you have been working on something that's absolutely wild. So maybe we'll see those next week. Let's see them next week.
Absolutely. I think, again, as I said, 800 words is all that you need to send in. Send it in as a PDF document. So write it in Word if you have to, or Google Docs, and you can then save it, export it as a PDF document. Make sure that your font size is 12 and it is double spaced, or at least 1.5 line space, so it's easier to read and mark up. And make sure you put in your name, the date, and so on, and send it to Otis.
Okay. Thank you all. Appreciate you. And I will
Thank
see
you,
you
Otis.
next week.
Thank you, Abhinav.
Thank you.
Thank you, Otis, and great seeing all of you today.
Thank you, Otis.
Bye.
Thank you.